Let me ask you about this too. Is there any concern, is it even possible that if American travel restrictions are eased and the flow of money is allowed more freely than it is now, that conditions in Cuba could get so good that the Cuban Adjustment Act or the number of visas from Cuba that we allow to the United States every year could be reduced or even eliminated?
You know, you bring up another very important issue, which is this, and a lot of people may not know what the Cuban Adjustment Act is, and so I think you brought up a very important issue.
It's like a quota.
It allows, look, there is because of the Cuban Adjustment Act of 1966, any Cuban who comes to the United States is allowed in. It's the only category where that is the case. If you're Nicaraguan, Honduran, Colombian, Haitian, Ethiopian, Vietnamese, anybody else in the world, that's not the case.
I thought there was a cap.
No, not for the Cuban Adjustment Act.
Okay, well.
Now, here's the question. Look, Jeff, you brought up another issue which I think is very, very important. With every positive thing comes some responsibility, right? And if Cubans, are allowed to come in because of the spirit of the Cuban Adjustment Act says they're basically political exiles. It's because of the political situation in Cuba. And I agree with that. Well then, how can you later say, hey, thank you, United States, for allowing me in, unlike everybody else who doesn't have that privilege. It's a very unique privilege, which I think makes sense because of the political situation 90 miles away from the United States. But then you also have some responsibility. You can't say, I want to be allowed in the United States, no questions asked, because of the political situation in Cuba, and at the same time say, now I want to be able to travel back to that country unlimited, you know, with no limitations. But which one is it? Are you coming to the United States under the spirit of the Cuban Adjustment Act, which says that it's because of the political situation in Cuba, because you're oppressed and because there's political persecution, and then you want to be able to travel back and forth? Well, you can't have it both ways.
When most of us,
so yes, it does put it in jeopardy.
When most of us think about easing travel restrictions to Cuba, we think of people who have been in the Miami area and other places for a long time, and they want to visit their family. They don't think about short-term people when they start going back and forth.
Well, but either way, I mean, you know, right now, if you know, and we have the situation here and throughout the country, you have a lot of immigrants who want to come to the United States who cannot come in legally. I mean, we have a huge issue with illegal people who are here illegally, who come here to work, etc. The exception to that rule are Cubans, who, if they are able to get out of that oppressed regime and they arrive in the United States, they're allowed in. And I think that makes sense because of the political situation 90 miles away. It's the only communist totalitarian regime in the hemisphere. It's also a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, if you're allowed in because of those circumstances, how then can one justify going back as a tourist for whatever reason? For
our viewers and readers, we should establish the context. You speak of Cuba with some authority.
Well, look,
your family...
But I'm consistent. You know, okay. I have the same attitude. I believe that we...
But your family's from Cuba.
Yes, absolutely, okay. Absolutely. And we have very strong historical ties to that island. We should have a show about that one day. And I'm very proud of that, as I am very proud of being a first-generation American born in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm very proud of both my heritage and clearly of the greatest nation in the world, which is this country. Our country, the United States of America, has been exceedingly and very generous with Cubans leaving Cuba because of the political situation there. The question is this: should those who then, within 5 years, can become U.S. citizens, should they be allowed to then, with no limitations, be able to travel back and forth to a country that they left and were allowed to come into this great country because of the political situation in Cuba? And I would tell you that that is in violation of the spirit of the Cuban Adjustment Act, which is what you talked about. It puts it at risk, which I think is sad. But also, I think it also, yes, you're right. Coming from that community, I think that with that great privilege, there has to be some responsibility.
On another immigration matter, you've spoken publicly recently about bringing some clarity to overall immigration policy.
Absolutely.
And you're putting the accent on giving adults who are already here by whatever means, give them opportunities to become legal here, and not send them back to where they came from and leave their children here. That to you makes no sense.
Well, what makes no sense to me is when you have American citizens, children, born in the United States, American citizens, whose parents have broken the law, and who need to suffer the consequences of breaking the law. In other words, all of us, if we break the law, if you speed, if you, if you commit any sort of traffic infraction, or if you do something else, there are consequences that you should pay, and you have to pay. But by the way, the consequences have to fit the crime, obviously. If speeding is not the same thing as killing somebody. So what to me makes no sense is when you have American citizens, children, who are born here, whose parents have broken the law, and that's clear. But the remedy should not be to break up that family and to leave those American children without parents by deporting their parents, if there may be other ways to deal with it that make more sense. Number one. Number two is we also need to make sure that we protect our borders. The United States can't be the only country that doesn't have the right to protect its borders and to determine who comes in and who leaves the country. And the only way we're going to be able to do that, I think, is by coming together in a bipartisan fashion, putting together a comprehensive way to deal with how to secure our borders, which, by the way, we have the technology to do so if we had the will, number one, and also then decide what are we going to do with the people that are here.
So what are we going to do with the people?
Well, let me tell you what
you've had years to think about this.
Let me tell you what we're not going to do. I mean, and no matter who it is in this country, when you ask them, okay, are we going to deport everybody who's here? And then people say yes. I'll say, all right, how? How do you do that? How do you do that? Are we going to, because remember, it's not like there's signs, people have signs in their homes saying, I'm here illegally, come get me. And there are people who are here illegally throughout the entire country, in every neighborhood. So what are we going to do? Are we going to now start knocking on people's doors? Law enforcement officers? We're going to have to hire millions of them, knocking on people's doors and saying, let me see your papers. And by the way, if you're subject to deportation, people are not stupid, and there's somebody with a uniform knocking on your door, you're not going to answer the door. So are we going to then now get search warrants to go into people's homes, to start searching for people under beds? Is that? No. And of course, when you actually realize what it would take to do that, if that's what you wanted to do, which is, something that we should look at. Everybody says, no, we can't do that. That's a fascist state. All right. If you're not going to do that, and then how do you bring people forward so that we know who they are, so that we can deal with them, so they can pay the consequences of the violation of the law that they've committed, but without violating every civil, every civil freedom that this country is based on.
So how
do you do that?
So you use the term pay. Is it as simple as, okay, pay up?
No, I think there's, and again, look, I'm not dictator or God for the day.
Right here.
But if we were, let me tell you what I think needs to happen. I think there've got to be, first place, consequences for those who've broken the law. What is a crime? It's a civil infraction. By the way, I think it should be changed. Once you can't do it, retroactively. I think it should be stiffened, but it's a civil infraction. So what should the penalty be? What's reasonable? A hefty fine? Let's talk about that. That's what we should be looking at. All right, number one. So now, by the way, there are some that have broken other laws, and if you've committed a violent crime, out of here, either in prison or out of here.
The key is violent.
Yes.
Whether you have children here or not.
Right. Oh yes, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. If you've committed a serious crime, and then sorry.
But shouldn't you be punished here first and then sent back?
Probably. It's also depending on there's some people that the countries don't want them back. When you've got some serious criminals,
well,
the countries may not want them back.
Tough.
So we're going to have to throw them in prison here, and so be it. And so be it. I have no sympathy and no tolerance for people who commit, crimes. By the way, I do have a little bit more sympathy for somebody who commits a speeding ticket, which we all should, none of us should do. But by the way, all of us have. All of us have.
I have a red light right now. We'll take a break. Our guest is U.S. Representative Mario Diaz-Balart of Miami, represents Eastern Collier and the Miami area. We come back, we'll talk about the administration, the Obama administration. What's going wrong? That'll take a long time. What's going right? We'll see if we can get anything out of our guest, Representative Mario Diaz-Balart.